History remembers glory, but it forgets the thirst, the rot, and the silence. In this series, we walk a day in the life of those you think you'd admire. You wake up in a haze of dust and stiffness. The wooden cot beneath you has left splinters in your back. You are 30 miles from Jerusalem, camped outside the crumbling walls of Jaffa. The ground beneath your tent is uneven and stinks faintly of donkey urine. You slept poorly, though you're used to that by now. Everyone is. Sleep is no longer for rest. It's just the gap between pain and the next command. Your body aches in places you don't even think about when you're at home. Every morning is a war against your own body. Blisters where the seams rub your heels, knees that refuse to bend without complaint, shoulders that groan before you do. You've only been in the Levant for 3 months, but your joints move like you've aged 20 years. You sit up slowly. The first thing you look for isn't your sword or helmet, it's your boots. Without them, you're useless. They're stiff from heat and sweat, and the leather at the edges is cracking. The soles are worn to softness, and the smell when you pull them close is worse than any battlefield you've seen. But you put them on anyway, because a man without boots in this place is a man who will not last. The week, there's no such thing as breakfast. You reach for a scrap of salted goat meat, which is more tender than flesh, and chew until your jaw aches. A skin of wine helps wash it down. This is half sour, and tastes faintly of skin and smoke, but it keeps your stomach from rebelling. Water is for the wounded and the dying. For everyone else, there's the wine. You don't speak much in the morning. Words are reserved for orders or prayer. You nod at the men around you, fellow Crusaders, most of them strangers, bonded not by language or homeland, but by suffering. The camp is a sprawl of makeshift tents and cook fires gone cold. Someone somewhere is sharpening a blade. Someone else is limping toward the latrine trench. No one smiles. You strip down to your tunic and start dressing in layers that weigh more than some of the younger squires. First, the padded, gambeson thick linen, quilted tight, to keep your skin from breaking under the mail. Then the hauberk itself, a knee-length shirt of iron rings that drags down on your shoulders like pennants. It takes you 7 minutes to put it on. It used to take you 15. It carries your swordled. You've named it. Everyone names their weapon here, some for saints, others for wives they may never see again. You don't think about home much anymore. It only makes the days harder. The helmet comes last, a conical nasal helm, heavy and hot, with a thin slit for vision and less for breath. You don't wear it unless you have to. It makes your head throb and your hearing dull, but it's better than a spear in the face. Once dressed, not to rest. The day hasn't truly begun until someone tells you to move, and no one has spoken to you yet. That's a gift. You hear rumors of caravans, but rumors mean nothing here. What matters is whether your captain has decided to march, whether your company is to hold a road, scout a ridge, or dig another trench in the sun. You don't ask questions. You wait, and when the order comes, you obey. This is what it means to be a crusader. It is not God's hand guiding your sword. It is sweat in your eyes, sand in your food, iron on your skin, and death in the margins of every hour. And this, you remind yourself, is just the morning. The order to move Dosan T come with a trumpet. The road east is waiting, and no one wants to be on it. Least of all you shoulder your pack worn. The sound of boots on dry earth is rhythmic. No one walks the same way anymore. Some limp from old wounds. The dust kicks up almost instantly, clinging to every inch of cloth and skin. After 10 minutes, after 20, your eyes water. You are not marching into battle today. That would be easier to explain to yourself. No, today's march is one of supply or simple presence. You've stopped asking why you go where you go. The orders come and your feet follow. The terrain is open, mostly scrub and rock, punctuated by thorns that seem to grow from nothing. The land feels empty, but it's never truly silent. Somewhere out there, unseen eyes may be watching. Saracen scouts are not a myth there, fast, clever, and they know this land the way a priest knows scripture. You walk knowing that today might be the day you are seen, and not seen first. The sun rises, and the heat sharpens. Your gambeson, thick and necessary, begins to trap your sweat. The mail hauberk turns warm. Soon it feels like a second oven wrapped around your chest. You stop noticing the weight. You only notice what it does to your breath. Men begin to fall behind, quietly, with no ceremony. A man stumbles, and the one behind him steps around without a word. If he can walk, he'll catch up. If he can't, well, that's between him and God. You keep your eyes on the boots in front of you. One step at a time. You do not sing. The only sound is the shuffle of armor, the creak of leather, and the breath of tired men. Now and then you pass a corpse. Not fresh, half buried, or not buried at all. Bleached bones in Crusader armor, or what's left of it. No one looks. No one stops. You know it could be you next week. You know it could be you today. By midday, your hands are swollen from the heat. You take off one glove to rub your palm and immediately regret it. The sun burns like fire on bare skin. You put the glove back on and adjust the strap on your scabbard. Everything feels wrong. Your sword pulls to the left. The buckle of your belt digs into your hip. You think about water. You shouldn't, but you do. There's a skin of it in your pack wrapped, and knotted tight, rationed by the day. You could drink it now, but you don't, because you've learned. Water now means thirst, and thirst in the afternoon sun is worse than hunger, worse than pain, worse than fear. You press on. The march is endless, because it's not measured in distance, it's measured in endurance. How long can you stay on your feet? How long can you carry the weight? The sun is still climbing. A man 2 rows ahead. He hits the ground hard, shield clattering over his back. No one moves to help him, not because they don't care, because they can't. To stop is to fall behind. To fall behind is to be left. You keep moving. You didn't expect this. When you signed the cross, back in your village or city or manor, it was the call to something greater, to reclaim holy ground, to be part of God's will. You imagined banners, psalms, glory. No one told you about the march. No one told you that glory has a smell, and that smell is sweat and rot and rust, that God's will might be written in sand and foot blisters, not in gold and hymns. You were not born for this land. You were not raised for this sun, because someone said you must, because you believed them. Evening comes gradually. The sun softens just enough that your skin no longer stings. Your mouth is dry. You've survived the march. There's no true camp, just a stopping point. No walls, no roofs, just the familiar routine of men spreading out in small groups, dropping their packs and collapsing where they stand. A few speak, but most don't. Some cross themselves. Others stare at nothing. A Crusader's day ends not in triumph or prayer, but in silence. You find a flat spot beside a low outcrop and shrug off your gear. Removing the hauberk takes effort. The padded gambeson underneath is soaked with sweat, darkened under the arms and down your back. You strip it off and sit bare-chested, elbows on your knees. You haven't seen yourself in weeks. There are new bruises you don't remember getting. A scratch across your ribs, purple and angry. A blistered welt near your hip. No one is unmarked. It's small, cautious, and smokeless. You smell it. There's no fuel to spare in this land. A few dried dates are passed around part of the day's rations. You get 3. You chew slowly, pit and all. One of the older knights pulls out a coin-sized loaf of bread, breaks it in half, and hands you a piece without a word. It's hard as stone and tastes of mold. The gesture. He doesn't know your name, and you don't know his, but you marched together, and that's enough. The wine comes out next. A few sips, carefully rationed, shared across cracked lips. One man tries to sing a hymn. You stare at the fire, but it gives no warmth. The desert grows cold at night. You rub your arms. You don't care. Then the officers gather. They don't need to. Their presence draws attention without effort. The commander is a Norman, tall, broad, with a voice like gravel and a stare like a drawn sword. He's surrounded by a few lesser knights. They speak quietly, heads together, eyes glancing now and then toward the horizon. No orders are given yet, but you've learned to watch their expressions. Tonight, the brows are furrowed. The translator gestures eastward with his whole arm. This means something. Maybe the road ahead is worse than expected, or maybe the enemy is near. You're used to uncertainty now. In the early days, every rumor stirred your blood. Now, they stir nothing. You'll find out when the time comes. If you live that long, night descends fast. You lay out your bedroll, just a woolen blanket. You lay your sword at your side. That habit is now as natural as breathing. A man 3 spots down coughs violently for several minutes. You've seen what comes of it. A few days of weakness. If he makes it through the night, he may march tomorrow. If not, no one will carry him. You stare up at the stars. There are more here than at home. They seem closer, as if the heavens themselves have moved to watch. You think about your mother. Not often, but tonight. You remember the way she used to fold cloth, with fingers quick and sure. You remember bread fresh from the oven, the sound of church bells through a quiet village. You miss those bells more than anything. This is the part no one told you about. The quiet, the way the world shrinks at night, the way your thoughts turn inward, even when you don't want them to, even when you can't afford to. You close your eyes and sleep with your fingers curled around your sword hilt. Tomorrow, you march again, or die trying. You are woken not by the sun, the sharp sound of a blade being drawn too fast. Close, too close. The camp is already moving before your eyes fully open. Not a rush, not yet, but a kind of tension you recognize now. Something you feel before you understand. Half the men are on their feet. No one is shouting. There's no panic in the silence, only alarm. You grab your sword, already sheathed and ready, and struggle to your knees. Your mail hauberk is still on from the cold. You didn't take it off last night. A blessing now. A rider gallops past the edge of camp. Just passes through in silence. A scout? You see blood across the flank of his horse. Now the shouting begins. Orders ripple through the column in fragments. Shields form up on me. None of it coordinated. You fall in line next to the men you marched with yesterday. The older knight from the bread, the boy with the limp, a few Normans speaking too fast for you to follow. There's no time for unity now. The dust rises before the enemy does. You see the earth moving first in small plumes, then in long lines. Horses, fast, too fast. You tighten the strap on your shield. You feel it in your ribs. Before you feel it in your heart, you've fought before. Skirmishes, ambushes, but not like this. The Saracens come out of the dust. You don't see their faces. Their horses move sideways, then forward, then disappear behind ridges, only to return from a different angle. They don't charge, not like your kind do. They swarm your line braces. Shields up, spears out. The priest is mumbling Latin behind you, too fast to be coherent. No one stops him. Then the arrows begin. You hear the first ones. The sound is soft, but what follows is not. A man 2 down from you. You do not look at him. If you look once, you will not stop. The barrage continues. You try to count the volleys, but lose track. 1 to 6. Your shield rattles under the impact. Something thuds into your mail and bounces off only a graze. You tell yourself it was nothing. Then the riders closed in, not in a charge. They ride past, close enough to strike, then peel away before you can return the blow. One cuts across your shield with a saber. The shock vibrates through your arm to your spine. You swing back, but hit air. He's gone before your blade finds anything solid. They grind at you, not from pain, from rage. He breaks formation, charging forward with his axe raised. He makes it 6 paces, before he disappears beneath hooves. When the dust clears, there's nothing left of him but torn cloth. You do not move. You grip your sword tight and wait. That's all you can do. The training tells you to hold formation, stay shoulder to shoulder, absorb the rush, return with force. But this isn't what you trained for. There is no full charge, no line to break, only the constant pressure of 1,000 cuts. Then the real fear sets in. Not the kind that comes from danger. You've known that kind since the first week. You begin to wonder if anyone is truly in command. The officers shout, Men are splintering, some falling back, some pressing forward, some just frozen in place. You stay close to the others. You don't know their names, but they are now the only world that matters. Another arrow strikes near your foot. Nor you. You drop it instinctively, and now your left arm is bare. You are off balance. You want to scream. You want to run, but there is nowhere to run. You remember something your captain said. When training a new batch of recruits, you will die with a mouth full of sand. Now, you realize he was being kind, and then, as quickly as it began, it ends. The riders vanish again, not rooted, just gone. They pull back into the dust. No cheer goes up. No victory is claimed. The silence that returns is not peace, it is confusion. You're still standing. A few Saracens, they rarely die needlessly. They do not stay to be slaughtered. They strike and vanish. It is not cowardice. It is intelligence. You look at your sword, still in your hand. You don't remember using it. There is a long, shallow cut across your thigh. You don't remember that either. You breathe through your nose. Your legs are shaking. There is no glory, no honor. You've survived a battle. You didn't understand, following orders that were never clear in a land that doesn't want you. And tomorrow, they look like you, stunned, exhausted, quiet. One of them kneels beside a fallen comrade and begins pulling the rings from his mail salvage for the next man. The priest says nothing. This is combat in the Holy Land. It is not tournaments or banners. It is not St. George or sacred prophecy. It is sand, blood, confusion, and the weight of knowing that this is only one day of many, and you haven't even buried the dead. There are men here who will never see another battle. They are not wounded in glorious combat. They do not fall with swords in their hands. Their deaths are quiet, slow, and mostly ignored. No one speaks of them, not because they are forgotten, but because everyone knows. Their fate is coming for the rest of you too. Sooner or later, you begin to notice them more in the weeks after your first true battle. Men who fall behind in the march, not from injury, the kind that lives in the gut, and then, one day, they stop. The first to go are the youngest. The boy you marched with, the one who limped. You remember his name now, Etienne. Not even when kicked, just pale, cold. His skin is wet, but he hasn't had water since the day before. The priest kneels beside him. No effort is made to carry him. No one says it, but you know the rule. Those who can't walk don't go, and those who don't go die. You give him your water skin anyway. His eyes never focus. By noon, he is gone. You didn't even see it happen. That night, a man digs a shallow grave with a wooden bowl. Another marks it with a broken spear. Only flies. Then comes the sickness. It has no name. Some call it the rot. All you know is how it starts. With a looseness in the bowels, a swelling in the tongue, a rattle in the lungs. A knight from Flanders begins coughing on a Tuesday. By Friday, he is vomiting black and shivering so hard he cannot hold a spoon. The surgeon bleeds him, then applies crushed mint and vinegar to his skin. He dies the next morning anyway. No one touches his armor. No one wants it. The next day, 2 more begin coughing. Then 5. You sleep further from camp now. You cover your face with cloth. You avoid the communal bowl. Eat only what you can cut with your own knife. But it won't save you if it wants you. One morning, the old knight who once gave you bread is gone. No one knows when. His blanket is folded. His sword is missing. Some believe he wandered off to die alone. Others think he finally broke. No one goes to find him. They say, this is God's fire, that suffering burns the soul clean, that your weakness makes room for grace. You stop believing that, because you see what happens to the bodies no one buries. Some are burned. Some are piled in the ravine behind the camp. Some are left for birds. It's not cruelty, it's survival. There is no time, no strength. The dead do not march, and the living do not carry. Even the priest stops saying. He just sprinkles water and moves on. You see him sitting alone one night, his hands shaking. You think of asking him for guidance, a blessing, a reason, but you don't. Because you already know what he'll say. Nothing. The silence grows. Not the silence of peace, but of fear, of fatigue. You march through quiet hills, and no one speaks. You sleep beside coughing men and pray. You won't wake up like them. You start to count how many footsteps it takes to get from 1 mile marker to the next. You whisper to yourself, not out of madness, but just to hear a voice. Sometimes you miss the battles. At least in battle, there is purpose. There is heat, noise, movement. Here, in the slow decay of the camp, there is only stillness and the knowledge that something inside you is slowly slipping. You start to think about how many days you've been gone. You don't remember anymore. You remember the name of your village, but it feels less real than the dirt beneath your fingernails. You no longer believe you are going home. You learn not to hope. Hope is heavy. It's the soft edge of thoughts that distract you from what you must do. Instead, you count your steps, your rations, your bruises, your dreams. You speak only when spoken to. You sleep when you can. And you, the colorless lips, the hands that tremble when lifting a sword, because you know, once it begins, it doesn't stop. This is how the crusade breaks you, not through arrows or blades, but through a world that doesn't care if you live, through a mission that cannot be questioned, through the slow, silent, endless unraveling of men who once believed they were chosen, with fewer than yesterday. The city doesn't move. You can see it from your trench. Pale, sun-blasted stone rising above dry earth. Towers squat like tired giants. Banners flutter on the breeze, green, gold, red, but you're not even sure which faction holds the walls now. The names have changed too many times. It's been how long? 30 days? You don't count anymore. You just know the rhythm. This is not battle. This is not conquest. This is the slow unmaking of everything. You thought a siege would be dramatic. You imagined catapults crashing against gates, ladders scraping the sky, heroes crying out to God as they scaled the walls. But that isn't this. Not even close. The siege is mud, flies, boils, hunger. It is a fight. not against men, but time. You wake to the sound of coughing. You hear men vomiting nearby, nothing left in their stomachs but bile and mucus. The water from the last well tastes of metal. Your captain lost a toe last week. Infection. He limps now, but still beats the drum. There are fewer officers each morning. Some snap. One simply walked into the no man's land one night and never came back. You're told to hold your position. Just orders. The walls mock you. They haven't cracked. You've thrown everything at them: stones, fire, curses. The sappers dig beneath the base, but the defenders pour water into the tunnels and drown them like rats. They drop tar and shoot arrows tipped in feces. You've seen men lose eyes, not once. One knight swore he saw movement and opening. A trick. He charged alone. He made it 3 steps past the ditch before the defenders opened the murder holes and dropped boiling sand. He lived for 3 more days. His screams were worse than the moans of the plague tent. No one speaks of him now. Hunger becomes normal. First, you eat your rations, then the horse meat, then the rats, then the belts, boiled and salted. One man tries to cook his leather boot. He sobs quietly under his cloak for an hour before someone takes the boot from him. The bishop forbids eating dogs. Then he disappears. The next night, the dogs are gone. Your teeth ache. You dream of bread not as food, but as memory, chewing, tearing, crust. You saw a man try to eat clay, not even out of madness, just to feel something in his stomach. He died with blood at the corners of his mouth. You think about home, then you stop, because it makes your ribs hurt worse. The dead don't go away. They pile up outside the walls. Some you bury, but most are too far gone. Too many, too heavy. The sun swells them. The flies eat their eyes first. You cover your mouth. It sticks in your beard. You smell it even when you sleep. Sometimes you hear groaning and think it's the wounded, but it's not. Just the wind through the ribs of someone half buried in the sand. You stop checking the names. You stop asking. And yet, the city does not fall. You see lights at night torches. You hear bells sometimes. Music, even laughter. How can they still laugh? Inside, they have gardens, wells, grain. You have mud and prayers. Sometimes, you wonder what you would do if the gates opened. If the enemy surrendered, would you even have the strength to climb the hill? Would your legs carry you? More and more, you suspect you would not enter at all. That even if victory came, you would remain here, in the trench, staring at the stones, waiting for the next noise, the next shadow. Victory feels like a myth, like heaven, like things you used to believe in. A new one. Someone inside the walls took power, or died, or fled. The knight beside you mutters, "You agree?" Then, late that night, something more changes. Out of breath, pale, he whispers to the commanders. They gather quickly, maps unrolled, fingers pointed. Not hope, no, not that but motion. The next morning, you are told to prepare, not for retreat, Not for retreat, not for attack. Just prepare. No one cheers. You scrape your sword clean. You tighten your boots. You count your remaining bandages. You look at the wall and realize you no longer want to take it. You just want it to end. This is the siege. It is not glorious. It is a slow drowning in heat, hunger, sickness, and silence. A test not of strength, but of endurance. And most of all, because no one here is still alive. They're alive because they haven't collapsed yet. You don't remember when the miracles started. At first, it was just words whispers in the ranks. Someone saw St. George walking the hills. Then came the bleeding hands. The man in linen. The angel that spoke in Latin to a shepherd boy from our... You didn't believe it. Not really. But when you looked around, you realized something terrifying. They did. The fire began with fasting, out of piety. Then they gave them up for God. Then they stopped eating altogether. One monk brother, Nicodemus, refused food for 9 days. On the 10th, he collapsed. On the 11th, naked, covered in ash, proclaiming that Jerusalem was within arm's reach, that the gates would open by God's breath, alone. The commanders ordered him confined. He marched with the flagellants. You watched them once. 20 or so pilgrims walking barefoot over the rocks, backs bare, blood running in red rivulets down their spines as they whipped themselves raw. They sang as they walked. You couldn't understand the words. Maybe no one could. One night, someone burns the chapel tent. No one sees who. The bishop had spoken against the false visions, called the fevered saint. 2 days later, his tent is gone melted canvas, blackened icons, the smell of sulphur and piss. No one is punished, alone. The relics appear next. First, a splinter of the true cross, then a vial of Mary's tears, then the finger bone of Saint Bartholomew. You know they aren't real. Everyone knows, but they kneel anyway, pledge themselves anew. A knight you once shared bread with falls to his knees before a piece of blood-soaked cloth. He says it cured his cough. You saw him coughing that morning. It doesn't matter. Belief is stronger than truth here. You begin to hear the singing at night. Not hymns something older. No melody. Just the same line. Over and over, low and rising. Burn the flesh. Free the soul. Burn the flesh. Free the soul. It echoes across the hills, beyond the siege lines. You ask who they are. Someone says they're called the pure. No one knows. The next day, you find one later naked, bites his own wrist. They tie him to a cart. And yet, part of you understands. You want to believe. You want to think this pain means something. That the death, the filth, the silence, the ritual of eaters, for a purpose, because the alternative is worse. That it was all for nothing, so you start to pray again. Not the quiet, measured prayers you once knew. These are wild, desperate things, half Latin. You beg not for victory, but for meaning, for mercy, for silence, for anything. No one answers. But one morning, a child comes to the edge of camp, dressed in white. She says, nothing, just stares. Someone kneels, then another. Then the whole line falls to the ground. The commanders try to stop it. They ban the processions, outlaw the self-whipping. But by now, the camp is beyond command. Men wander through the hills, shouting psalms. Others carve crosses into their chests. One knight sets himself ablaze atop a siege tower, screaming that he will be the torch that guides the way. They name him a martyr. You watched him burn for 7 minutes. You can still smell the fat in your nose. You no longer recognize your brothers. Their eyes are hollow. They fast until their cheeks cave in. They paint their faces with ash, mud, dried blood. They talk of angels, of purging, of sacrifice. One speaks of a final cleansing. You don't ask what he means. You just sharpen your sword. Not comfort, but fever, madness. You came here believing in God, because if you stop, it didn't begin the way you expected. There were no trumpets. There was only a quiet murmur that crept through the camp like a breeze before a storm. Word passed from mouth to mouth in hushed, disbelieving tones. The gate, they said, was open or, at least, not fully closed. Not breached by siege towers or shattered by battering rams. It had simply been left, enough to see through, enough to tempt the desperate. At first, few believed it. The crusade had dragged on too long, dulled your instincts. You'd heard too many lies, but this rumor had weight to it. Commanders huddled. You were told to form up and advance, not to charge. There was no speech, no rallying cry. Just the sound of boots dragging through dirt. As you approached the city walls, there was no roar of battle awaiting you, no arrows from parapets, no defenders cursing your god, only silence. The kind of silence that chokes. The closer you got, the stranger it felt. The gates. Great wooden beasts reinforced with iron, just left unguarded, as though the city itself had lost interest in defending itself. You expected it to be a trap, and part of you hoped it was. At least then you'd know your place. You'd know your role. You'd swing your sword, survive or die, and feel the certainty that battle always brings. But as you stepped past the gates, the emptiness was real. Streets stretched out in eerie calm. Stone buildings stood. It was not a city conquered. Not yet it was a city abandoned by something deeper than people. The air inside the city was heavy and old, like a tomb that had just been cracked open. It didn't smell of death. Not exactly. Not yet. But it reeked of rot, in another form spiritual decay. A sacred place, long since emptied of sanctity. You walked in slow procession with your brothers, a few whispered prayers. One man wept softly. You didn't know why. Perhaps he didn't either. In the main square, you found the first pile of bodies. Dozens of civilians, heaped without care, as though dumped by a retreating hand hurried to bury them. Their eyes were open, mouths slack. Women and children, mostly the elderly, their clothing stained and torn. Some had signs of violent sword cuts, broken limbs, but others seemed simply to have lain down and died. Starvation, fear, poison. You'll never know. The fountain they had been thrown into was dry. It should have shocked you. Or perhaps you had simply lost the ability to feel worse. Around you, the mood shifted. The spell of silence broke, but not into celebration. What followed was stranger. One night laughed. Inside, he found nothing but pottery and a dead goat, but he called it a miracle anyway. Others followed suit. Looting began not by order, but by instinct. Tapestries were torn from walls. You watched a man fight another over a single sandal. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like desperation given form. You wandered away from the crowd, deeper into the city, through winding alleys that seemed untouched by the chaos. Jerusalem, this place you had dreamed of, prayed for, was oddly small now. Its stones held history. Every corner you turned offered another contradiction. Sacred walls daubed with filth, shrines long neglected, marketplaces that hadn't heard the voice of trade in weeks. You found yourself before what must once have been a temple, though the fire had reduced it to a shell. The roof was gone. A single figure remained, an old man in burnt robes, his head bowed over what might have once been. You stepped forward. He didn't look up. You had no answer. You turned and left him to his ruin. Back in the square, a man had set himself ablaze. You didn't see it happen. Only the smouldering remains. Someone said he had declared himself the Lamb of the Apocalypse and doused himself in oil. Whether it was madness or devotion, no one knew. A few called him a martyr. Others didn't even stop walking. Night fell slowly over the city. You sat on a broken column in the courtyard of a mosque, eating stolen bread that tasted like ash. The stars came out. Somewhere nearby, another man screamed until his voice broke. Still others wandered in silence. There was no joy. This was Jerusalem. The gates had opened, but nothing waited on the other side. You awoke to smoke. It was the light, drifting kind, that clings to the corners of ruined rooms. You stirred beneath a borrowed blanket, stiff with dried blood and sweat, your muscles tight and brittle. For a brief moment, you thought you were back, in camp back, before the gates, but the wind carried a different scent now. Scorched oil, human filth, burning parchment, and faint, but unmistakable something rotting. You rose slowly, limbs protesting, armor still unfastened from yesterday. You didn't bother tightening the straps. No one would fight you for what was left. Jerusalem had become a kingdom of chaos. The looting never stopped. The holy city was being stripped like a carcass. Every house, shrine, and shadowed alley, poked and pried at for scraps. Knights who had once prayed over their swords now dug through refuse like dogs. Broken icons dangled from belts as trophies. Relics once thought to bleed. Miracles were hoarded alongside spoiled dates and cracked amphorae. And always the flies. You couldn't escape them. They clung to you. They buzzed with purpose, with clarity, like they alone knew what Jerusalem had become. You wandered. No one gave orders anymore. The command structure. Some men vanished entirely, taking what they could carry and disappearing into the desert. Others crowned themselves kings of blocks or courtyards, drinking from shattered goblets and declaring their reigns to walls that didn't answer back. The rest drifted. You were among them. You passed a chapel where a priest had nailed pages of scripture to the doorway in a crude imitation of a triumph. The words were smudged. Inside, The altar was piled with bones, some from animals. You didn't want to know which prayers had been answered. Further on, you found a boy huddled beneath a collapsed archway. He couldn't have been more than 8. Just a blank stare and a crust of dried figs in his hands. He looked at you. You looked back. He didn't beg. You didn't offer. That was the kind of mercy you had left. And then, amidst the ash, came the procession. It was a slow, staggering thing. A line of men, some war crowns made of thorns, flagellant, pilgrims who had convinced themselves this horror. They moaned hymns in broken Latin, beat themselves with cords. You watched them pass. One tried to hand you a nail, the kind used in crucifixion. You let it drop from your hand without a word. You found shelter in the ruins of a bathhouse. The pool was dry, the mosaics cracked, but it was quiet. That was enough. You sat beneath a faded image of a saint whose name you couldn't remember, your back against cool marble, and you let yourself do nothing, not think. Nor you. The sound carried over the rooftops and was met by silence. You wondered if this was what victory felt like. You had come to Jerusalem to fight, to redeem. Instead, you were a scavenger in a city that bled without protest. And as the sun lowered behind the distant hills, you realized something that chilled you deeper than any wound. You had nothing left to conquer, only yourself. You left Jerusalem at dawn, not because you were ordered to know. Such orders came anymore, but because something in you knew it was time. The city was done with you. It had devoured the flesh of your army, drank deep of your faith, and now spat you out like gristle. You were not the only one who felt it. A thin procession wound its way, gaunt, bearded silhouettes beneath cracked helms and patched cloaks. No banners, no prayers. The first few miles were the hardest. Your legs remembered the march in reverse. Every step away from the city, as though you were abandoning something sacred. Still, you walked, because there was nothing left to kneel before. The land beyond Jerusalem had not changed. The hills still rose in silence. The sun still punished the stones. But something inside you had shifted so utterly that even the wind on your face felt foreign. You passed old encampments that had long since been stripped bare, bones half buried in dust, tattered cloth fluttering from thorn bushes. One evening you stopped at a ruined way station, a crumbling cistern. There you met a man who did not speak Latin, French, or German, but offered you a fig and pointed to the stars. You shared no words, only silence and food. For the first time in months, you slept without dreaming of swords. Some pilgrims joined your path for a while, women who had lost sons, monks who had lost their God. You did not stop to bury them. There was no ritual left in your hands. The sight should have brought joy. You had come so far, sacrificed so much, and for what? A city that refused to be saved? A banner planted in soil that no longer grew anything but ghosts? You traded your armor for passage on a creaking ship. He had seen your kind before. The voyage was slow. The salt stung your wounds. The nights were cold and filled with the sound of waves slapping wood. You kept to yourself, watching the horizon. Others drank or wept or argued about what came next. You stayed silent. When land came into view, it didn't feel like a return. It felt like exile. The townspeople did not cheer. You were thinner, quieter, and carried the smell of foreign soil. The language you spoke still sounded familiar, but the shape of your words had changed. You walked inland, home perhaps, or toward. People asked you where you had been. No one ever asked, but food no longer tasted. You found yourself waking at night, listening for screams that weren't there, clutching for a sword that wasn't beside you. On Sundays, you stood at the back of the church, unable to cross the threshold. The priest once asked if you had brought back a relic. You didn't show him the bone you carried in a cloth satchel. You didn't know whose it was. Years passed. The world moved on. Another crusade was called. You didn't go. You tended a small garden. You spent your days in silence. And when you finally lay down one last time, still holding those figs, still waiting for a mercy you didn't have, and that, more than the hunger, more than the wounds, more than the horrors of war, is why you wouldn't have lasted a day as a crusader. Because the day never truly ends. It follows you home